Join us for our ISO 14001 2015 update. I'm sure many of you are getting anxious for the upcoming changes and learning what needs to be done in the time frame that it needs to be done by. So we'll discuss all of that during this webinar. My name is Scott Jones. I'm the EHS Environmental Health and Safety Program Manager here at Perry Johnson Registrars. I'm also a lead auditor to ISO 14001, 18001, R2, which is an e-waste, electronic waste recycling standard, as well as e-stewards, which is another electronics recycling standard. RIOS, which is more of your scrap, ferrous, non-ferrous metals recycling standard, as well as ISO 50001 energy management. So I'll take as many questions as I can towards the end. So if you have questions, please hold them or type them into the question box, and we'll get to them at the end of this presentation. So today's agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about what PGR does, who we are, what we're all about, some of the benefits and drivers of ISO 14001, the new version of the standard, kind of where it was, where the previous version was, where we're going with the 2015. We'll talk about some of the key changes of the standard, and then we'll end with the certification and transition requirements for getting certified to ISO 14001. So just by taking a quick glance at the audience here, it looks like we have a number of clients, potential clients, some auditors and consultants as well. So welcome everybody. I'm coming here to you live from our headquarters here at PJR. We're located here in Troy, Michigan. You have the contact information here, and I'll put my contact information up at the end of this presentation. So if you have questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to contact me. I'll have my email address up there as well as the phone number. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Also, this presentation will be available at the end of the webinar. Probably within a day or so it'll be posted on our website. If you'd like it sooner, feel free to contact me and I will send you a PDF copy of it. So we have a lot to cover, and I know there's a lot of changes and a lot to discuss, so I might go pretty quickly through some of this. So please feel free to ask any questions at the end. If I don't get to your question, again, feel free to type it in an email, and I'll answer it as soon as I can, hopefully within a day or two. All right. So PGR, we're a leading ISO 14001 registrar. We're certified to a number of different standards, which we'll get to on the next slide. We've certified companies throughout the world. We have companies certified in Australia, Brazil, throughout the EU, Japan, India, Malaysia, Mexico, Singapore, Thailand, and these are just sampling of some of the countries that we operate in. But if you have an interest in a specific country, we have auditors all over the world and can easily assist you. So here are some of the standards that we are accredited to. Obviously ISO 14001 and 9001. And as we talk about the changes to 14001, a lot of these changes will also apply to 9001 since that revision is coming out also. So some of the benefits of getting certified to an environmental management system like ISO 14001 is one, to help you meet the legal requirements that your company has to adhere to. It basically sets the framework for identifying those legal requirements and making sure that you put in place procedures and processes to help ensure that those legal requirements are complied with. And it also helps to improve your organization's environmental performance. Now, the 14001 2015 standard really focuses on this environmental performance, more so than just continual improvement of the management system. It wants to see environmental performance, improvement of environmental performance within your organization. You get management commitment and employee engagement by implementing these type of standards. The more employees get involved with management systems like this, the more they feel important and tied to that company, and the more effort that they put forth. Business management, notably for meeting stakeholder requirements improving public image, achieving strategic objectives, and integrating with business management systems. Also, supplier environmental performance. So one of the changes to 14001 is also looking more in depth at supplier environmental performance, not just your on-site activities. Provides a competitive edge. You know, if you're certified to an environmental standard like this, it shows that you're trying to do the right thing, that you're being environmentally conscious. It puts you ahead of other companies that may not be certified. And then providing financial benefit. By implementing these type of standards, your objectives and targets and your environmental performance, they're looking at ways to reduce your impact on the environment. By doing that, a lot of times you're reducing your energy consumption, so you're saving money on energy, reducing, let's say paper, so you're trying to reduce your paper consumption, you're reducing the amount of paper. So a lot of this will provide financial benefit by implementing some of these objectives and targets to achieve that environmental performance. So the ISO 14001 drivers, we talked about the benefits. Now we're going to talk about why would a company want to get certified to ISO 14001. What are some of those drivers involved? So committed to environmental protection, conservation, reduction of risk of adverse environmental impact, and business management drivers included customer requirements and public image. You know, aside from those financial aspects, you have the customer requirements, which is a lot of times a big driver for companies to get certified. And then the public image, stakeholders, potential clients out there. If you show that you're making an effort to improve your environmental performance or your quality for ISO 9001, it gives you generally a competitive advantage over companies. So for those of you who are not familiar with the process of releasing a new standard like the 2015 version, it undergoes a series of revisions and updates and reviews by the committee that's putting this together. So the final draft of the standard was completed. Now it has to go to a vote. Once that's done and is finally approved, then it'll be publicly released, and that's anticipated to take place in September or October 2015. Depends on where you read. A lot of times there may be a little bit of a delay, so October is probably more realistic, potentially even into November, but hopefully by September, October, this standard will be released. And we'll talk about the transition requirements and the certification requirements as far as, I know some companies may still be going through initial certification to ISO 14001, 2004, which they're more than able to do. So we want to talk about the time frame that companies can get certified to the older version, and then the transition requirements to the new version, and then basically when that older version is null and void, and when if companies are still certified to that older version at that point, that all certificates will be revoked if they're not transitioned by then. So we'll talk about that right before we talk about the certification process. All the comments made on the draft international standard, otherwise known as DIS. So you might see ISO DIS 14001. That just means it's the draft version of the standard. So all these have been resolved, and the final version of the standard has been agreed. So now we're just waiting for the vote, which hopefully will take place in the next month or two, and then any remaining issues will be tightened up, and then it'll be released in September or October. So why was the standard revised? Generally, every standard that's out there, every ISO standard, gets revised periodically. And honestly, ISO 14001 is probably one of the standards that's gone the longest without a revision. So that's why we're going to see a lot of changes. It's been obviously 11 years since the previous version came out, so there's a lot of changes and a lot of comments that have come throughout those 11 years to put this new version out. So to ensure that ISO 14001 continues to serve organizations and maintain its relevance in today's marketplace, the standard is being revised. The revision will not only address the change in environmental practices, but also ensure that the management system is future-proof. So we want to make sure that whatever standard is coming out is able to be applied to any organization, no matter what the size is, no matter the culture, no matter the legal requirements, that any organization in any part of the world can get certified to ISO 14001. So here are some other topics as far as why the standard was revised. For market relevance, any management system standard should meet the needs of and add value for the primary users and other affected parties. To make sure that it's compatible with the different management systems, obviously we have ISO 9001 being revised this year. So 14001 needs, since they follow each other and it's easy to integrate the two standards, it makes sense to revise ISO 14001 to be in line with the 9001 requirements. You have ease of use. It should be ensured that the user can easily implement one or more management system standards. You know, you don't want it to be so cumbersome and so complex that it's difficult for organizations to understand the requirements and implement the requirements. You want it to be functional and easy to use for any organization. Topic coverage should have sufficient application coverage to eliminate or minimize the need for sector-specific variances. And then flexibility. Again, this should be able to be used by any organization. Technically sound basis should be based on proven management practices or existing scientifically validated and relevant data. Easily understood, unambiguous, free from cultural bias, easily translatable, and applicable to businesses in general. Should not prohibit the trade of product. Applicability of conformity. The market need for first, second, third-party conformity assessment or any assessment combination thereof should be assessed. And then exclusions. Should not include directly related product, including services, specifications, test methods, performance levels, or other forms of standardization for products produced by the implementing organization. So obviously those are more the generic reasons why it changed. Really it's, you know, as business changes, as the systems evolve, we learn from our mistakes. We learn from the, you know, from the issues that were identified in the previous revisions, and then we come up with hopefully a more improved management system. So if you haven't seen the draft version of the standard, you'll notice that the entire structure of that standard has changed for both 9000 and 14001. The structure is exactly the same, so it's easy to integrate the two. So the revision is based on the ISO approved requirements and application guidance related to the high-level structure, or HLS, for management system standards. So we'll get into what this structure looks like and really what it's all about. But this is kind of the new procedure, new method for these type of standards. They're getting away from the structure that it was and looking more into leadership, risk levels, and performance improvement. So the revision shall ensure the maintenance and improvement of the basic principles of ISO 14001 and 2004, and also the retention and improvement of its existing requirements. So here we have the high-level structure. This basically tells you what it's all about. It's really just a framework for the new management system standards, which incorporates identical core text, common definitions and terms. Really, it's just a kind of a fancy way of saying it's a framework that is consistent among the different standards. It has the same table of contents, so if you look at both standards on the surface, they look the same. Once you get into it, obviously one's quality, one's environmental, and you start seeing some of those key differences. But on the surface, they're really trying to make it simple for any organization to integrate the two standards. So it is designed to benefit users implementing multiple ISO management system standards and be applicable to any management system standard. So as additional ISO standards are being revised, they are also going to be revised to this high-level structure. So again, this is to allow the compatibility across the different management system standards. So the structure of this new standard is based on the Annex SL. So this is a separate document that outlines what the framework should look like. So if you want to learn more about the Annex SL, you can go to the ISO website, go to Google, type in the Annex SL, and a number of documents will come up and information will come up that'll help you do your own research and understand more in depth of what the Annex SL is all about. But it's a standardized structure format, common text and requirements in many areas, and then again, any ISO standard that's going to be revised will be revised to this Annex SL in the future. So this is what the table of contents now looks like for the standard. You have basically 10 chapters, 10 clauses of the standard now. You have your scope, your references, terms and definitions, and then again, the course portion of the standard and the requirement starts with Chapter 4. That starts with your context of the organization. And like I said earlier, one of the key focuses on this new standard is geared towards the leadership component. And we'll get into the leadership and the specifics of some of these different requirements. Now, we're not going to go into the specific requirements of each clause. This is more just an overview of some of the general changes to the standard. In the future, as it gets a little closer to the new standard being released, we'll start to have more requirement-specific webinars to help you really understand what the requirements are chapter by chapter. But in our webinar, we just don't have the time to go into the specifics of each single chapter and lay out every requirement. So just to cover the general requirements, we'll talk about these chapters. We'll talk about the revised PDCA model, so which we see right here. So this is the draft 14001 PDCA model. For those of you not familiar with the PDCA model, it stands for Plan, Do, Check, Act. So that hasn't changed. It's still a continual improvement cycle. So you're starting with your planning process. That goes into the do process. So once you've planned your system, you've come up with the procedures, the documents, the processes that you're going to follow, the objectives and targets. Now it's time to implement that. You're going to conduct your training, your operational procedures. After a while, after it's been implemented, you want to check that to see how well it's performing. And that goes into the performance evaluation. That's that check portion. So then that goes into the improvement. So what comes out of that performance evaluation, whether it's non-conformances from an internal audit or non-compliances from legal requirements or evaluation of compliance, that information will go into the improvement, which is basically your non-conformity process, your corrective action process. What went wrong, what went right, what needs to be improved upon, how are you going to improve upon that, put that back into the planning process. From there, you just continue the cycle. So as you see, one key difference in the center of all this is that leadership component. So we'll get into that in a little bit more detail here in a second. So the key changes, again, emphasis on leadership. There's more of a focus on risk management, especially with potential impacts to the environment. Emphasis on objectives, measurement, and change. So objectives and targets are great, but how are you going to achieve those? How are you going to measure those? What indicators are you going to use? So all that needs to be established, and that's part of that planning process. And then you have communication and awareness. There's a lot more emphasis on communication, not just internally now, but more externally as well. And then there's fewer prescriptive requirements. There's more generic requirements. It doesn't tell you specifically you need to do this, this, and this. It gives you a little bit more flexibility and freedom to make the management system work with your organization. So changes to ISO 14001:2015, strategic environmental management. So there's an increased prominence of environmental management within the organization's strategic planning process. Now here we have the leadership. To ensure the success of the system, a new clause has been added that assigns specific responsibilities for those in leadership roles to promote environmental management within the organization. So obviously this is a big change. There's a whole clause or section on just leadership now. So they want to make sure that from the top down, from the owners, the presidents to the department managers, that everybody is communicating the environmental management, that everybody's aware of their requirements and how they impact and affect the environmental management system. Protecting the environment. The expectation on organizations has been expanded to commit to proactive initiatives to protect the environment from harm and degradation, consistent with the context of the organization. So it's not just we're going to identify what our potential aspects and impacts are, what our legal requirements are, and we're going to do the bare minimum basically to meet those. And if something happens, well, then we'll put a corrective action in place. That's not going to happen anymore. They want it to be proactive. You want to identify those aspects and impacts and those legal requirements and not just do the bare minimum, but improve upon those, especially those aspects and impacts. So that leads to prevention of pollution, sustainable resource use, climate change mitigation and adaptation, protection of biodiversity and ecosystems. So you want to look at these areas and see how you can improve those from the beginning, not after something goes wrong. Which leads into your environmental performance. So there's a shift in emphasis with regard to continual improvement from improving the management system to improving environmental performance. Obviously, the continual improvement of the management system is still going to be there. That's part of the PDCA model. But really the emphasis is going to be on that environmental performance. How are you going to improve that? And that truly starts with the objectives and targets and those identifying those aspects and impacts. Life cycle thinking. So in addition to the current requirement to manage environmental aspects associated with procured goods and services, organizations will need to extend its control and influence to the environmental impacts associated with product use and end-of-life treatment or disposal. So now it's not just what are you doing on site with your processes, with the equipment that you have on site. It's looking at the products. How are those products being designed? Are you taking the environmental aspect of that product into consideration? And then going beyond that, how will that product be used? Will there be potential environmental impacts with the use of that product for disposal of that product? We have a lot of electronic waste recyclers. So if a company is designing and manufacturing electronic equipment, are they designing that equipment with more green components? So that way when it's time to dispose of that equipment, there'll be a reduction of potential environmental impact. So the whole, basically, cradle to grave life cycle process needs to be considered now with the new 14,001-2015. Communication. The development of a communication strategy with equal emphasis on external and internal communication has been added. And then documentation. The new standard doesn't really focus on documents and records. They don't have those necessarily specific requirements called out anymore. It's more focused on the documentation, especially related to the new type of technology that we have, with cloud-based systems, for running management systems. Are you basically aware of the documented information required to maintain an environmental management system? That's really what it's focused on now, because a lot of times you're going to put documents, records, you're going to put all that information, you're going to record a lot of information online now. You're not going to have those, the old way of just having everything hard copies. So this new standard really wants to focus on just the documentation as a whole and how that's being managed and what is truly needed to have an effective system in place. So those were kind of the general overview. Now we're going to get a little bit more into the chapter-specific breakdown of some of the changes. So I've kind of broken that down by the key change in each chapter 4 through 10. So we'll go over kind of the quick changes there, and then we'll get into the certification process. So I want to make sure we leave time at the end, 15 or 20 minutes or so, to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions, so we can hopefully address as many as we can. So Chapter 4 deals with the context of the organization. So the draft standard in this chapter accommodates the objective of companies giving more consideration to external issues and impacts in their environmental management system. So the needs and expectations of interested parties are to be better understood and evaluated as to whether they give rise to specific requirements. You have customer requirements. How are those demands of those requirements being met by the organization, especially if it comes from an environmental related text. If you have, if you're a customer of an organization who's ISO 14001, obviously as a supplier of theirs or customer of theirs, you will have specific requirements to meet as well. So are you meeting their requirements? So this will be looked at in much more depth with this new standard. Chapter 5, leadership. So top management should, among other things, take on more responsibility for the effectiveness of the management system and the integration of environmental management into business processes. The environmental policy should include a commitment to protect the environment beyond the corporate boundaries. So the standard is getting away from having a management representative. So having one person basically manage the whole system, with the thought process that this one person manages it while majority of the other employees or management aren't really involved or aren't really aware of many of the requirements. So by getting top management involved, all of top management involved, and making sure that all of them are aware of the requirements and aware of their responsibility to ensure that the requirements are being met, that this will flow through the organization better. So another thing with the leadership is not just looking internally. You got to look externally at the issues that your organization may pose to the external environment beyond those corporate boundaries. So in my opinion, the older version, ISO 14001 2004, was more of an internal look at the company. The new 2015 version, to me, still looks a little bit internal, but focuses more on the external, focuses more on the impact that you're having outside of your organization, from activities that are being done at the organization to the product life cycle. Chapter 6 with planning. So the entire planning process in environmental management has been restructured and should take the positive and negative environmental impacts of activities, products, and services into account more strongly from a life cycle perspective for in the future. Although the environmental assessment does not need to explicitly include a life cycle assessment of products and processes, for example, it should nevertheless examine the significant environmental aspects and all required commitments, such as legal, customer-specific, etc., as well as any risks associated with possible hazards and opportunities. So again, the main theme throughout this is you're not just looking inward anymore. You're looking at all the potential impacts that your organization that might have on the environment. So all that should be taken into account during that planning stage. Chapter 7 for support. The commitments to environmental protection are to be given more consideration in terms of communications as well. External representation and reporting must be regulated. With respect to documents and records, only the term documented information, again, shall be used in the future, thus taking into account the use of modern recording media. So with the support, if you're using external resources, making sure that they're competent for one, making sure that if they are training employees, that they're training employees properly, that they're communicating internally and externally properly. Basically, any support that's being used needs to be kind of vetted to make sure that it's meeting the requirements of the standard. You can't just take an external resource, and take it at face value that they know what they're doing, that they're reporting properly, that they're following the requirements of the standard. So as an organization, it's your responsibility to make sure that the support, whether it's internal, external, meets the requirements. Chapter 8, Operation. Operational scheduling and control should pay closer attention to upstream and downstream, and in particular outsourced processes. So this also includes the environmental impacts of products and services right through to the end of their utilization. Again, this even states that it's not just downstream and what potential harm your organization could have on the environment or your product on the environment, but now you have to look upstream as well to see what potentially those customer requirements are, making sure that you have the operational controls in place to meet those requirements, to meet the downstream requirements, to meet your organizational requirements, legal requirements. It's not just the initial surface look anymore. Now, this standard requires a much more in-depth evaluation of what's being done on site and how that affects upstream and downstream to the end of life of the service or product, wherever it may be. Chapter 9, Performance Evaluations. Based on the extended environmental assessment, expectations for environmental performance evaluations are now also being raised. So this includes performance of your environmental objectives, monitoring and measuring. Will also include all other corporate commitments and risks in relation to environmental performance. The monitoring, measuring, this performance evaluation, again, it's going to take into account your internal audits. That's still going to be there. Your compliance evaluations, those are still going to be there. So coming up, we'll break down each clause of the new standard and compare it to the 2004, so you can kind of get a visual idea of what some of the new sections and requirements are compared to the older version. And then lastly, for Chapter 10, this is your improvement. So this isn't your management review is part of the Chapter 9, your performance evaluation. So based on those internal audits, those compliance evaluations, your objectives and target evaluation, all that information is going to go into this improvement. So this is your correction of nonconformities as well as the continual improvement process. How are you going to improve that environmental performance? How are you going to improve your management system? So if you have nonconformities, if you're putting in those corrective actions will then go into that planning process to repeat the cycle. So here we have the table that kind of breaks down what the new requirement clauses are and what the old requirements were. So you can see the comparison of the clause numbers in the middle. So we're going in order with the new standard. So you start with your context of the organization. So obviously that's just your title, and it goes through. So, and this is all available on the ISO website that talks about the revision of the standard. There's a separate website that discusses this and has a lot of this information. So if you want to look at this in more depth and kind of get a feel for what the key changes are, you can go to that website. I didn't include it here, but if you go to the ISO.org website, you'll find a link that'll take you to the new website that discusses the revision of the standard. So you see that the environmental policies are still the same. Your organizational roles and responsibilities and authorities, that's still there. Obviously, the leadership component is new. So this is your section 4 and 5. Then here we get into section 6. So this is the planning portion of that PDCA model. You have your significant environmental aspects, that's still there. Compliance obligations. So here we have risks and opportunities. This obviously is new. Planning to take action. And then you get into the objectives and targets, and all that is still pretty consistent with the old version. So Chapter 7 for support. A lot of this isn't necessarily new. This is dealing with resources and competency, awareness, internal, external communication. So this really hasn't changed much. Really, there's additional requirements, obviously, but the core idea is still similar. Obviously, there's more of a focus on that external communication and those external resources, but making sure that communication and that training and awareness is still a key component of this. And here we have Chapter 8 for operations, and then also Chapter 9 for monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation. So for operations, you still have those operational controls and procedures that you need to put in place, emergency preparedness and response. For your monitoring and measuring, you still have evaluation of compliance, internal audits. Management review has now been put into this monitoring and measurement and analysis and evaluation. That's why the evaluation portion of it includes that management review. And then lastly, you have your improvement, and that's simply just your nonconformity and corrective action and continual improvement requirements. So those are, you can kind of see the clause comparison. So as you're updating your system or as you're going through your initial certification, you can see some of the consistencies and of how it was in the different clause numbers and requirements. So I'm sure it'll be a little confusing at first trying to understand, the kind of shift towards internal outlook for 14,001 and looking at the big picture, the end of life type picture now. So you're going to have to add, I'm sure, a significant portion to your management system to address some of those requirements. But again, as we get closer to the standard being released, and each month we'll start having more webinars discussing the specifics of the individual requirements for each chapter. So hopefully those will help you. We can't consult, since we're a registrar, and tell you how to do certain things, but we can help clarify what the specific requirements are and what they mean and what their intended use really is. So that more or less covers kind of a general overview of what are some of the key changes that are coming to the new version of ISO 14001 and kind of a general overview of the time frame. So for the certification process hasn't changed from the older version. Once you establish your documentation to meet the requirements of the standard, and that's the planning portion. So once you've planned your management system, you've established your objectives and targets, you have some data to back that up, you can then implement the rest of your system, making sure everybody's trained, aware of their responsibilities, everything's been communicated internally and externally. You've conducted your internal audits and your compliance evaluations, and you've conducted a management review from those outputs of that performance evaluation. Once you've done all that, then you can contract with a certification body to go undergo your initial certification audit. So your initial certification audit consists of 2 audits. You have a Stage 1 audit, which is your S1, and a Stage 2 audit, your S2. The Stage 1 audit is basically just a documentation review to make sure that you're ready to proceed to the Stage 2. And then once the Stage 2 is complete, which is the implementation of the documentation that was reviewed at Stage 1. So once we go on site, we verify that the implementation is done accurately and appropriately to meet your documentation and the standard requirements. And you address any nonconformities, and then once all that has been done, we can issue your certification. So for those of you who are transferring, who are currently certified to the old version and want to upgrade and transfer to the new standard, basically whenever you're ready, and we'll talk about the time frame, but whenever you're ready and you have the new requirements implemented at your next scheduled surveillance audit or recertification audit, we'll come in and verify that the requirements have been met. And once we do that, then we can issue a new certificate to the new version of the standard. So the transition process. So once the standard is finally released, which again is anticipated to be September, October of this year, you have 3 years from that date to transition to the new version of the standard. So that would put us approximately October-ish of 2018. So any company that's currently under contract, currently looking to get certified to the older version, the 2004 version, they can still do that. So you have basically 18 months from the time that the new standard is released to get certified to the old version. You know, if you haven't started yet, you may consider holding off for a few months until that new standard is released and just getting certified to the new version immediately. That way you don't have to worry about creating your documentation, creating all the requirements to meet the old version just to change them again to meet the new version. So you may consider that as an option. But if you're already underway, you've already established the documentation, and you're looking to get certified in the next 3 to 6 months or so, then you might as well continue with that process, get certified, and then take your time revising those procedures and those documents to meet the new requirements. And then at one of your scheduled audits, transition and upgrade to that new version. So then after that initial 18 months from the point when the standard is publicly released, after the 18 months, no company can get certified, initial certification to the old version. You could potentially still have a surveillance audit or a recertification audit to that old version as long as you do that transition prior to the 3-year expiration. So if you do not transfer within that 3-year time frame, your certificate will automatically be suspended and revoked because at that point the 2000 version is no longer valid. So here's the certification process. So again, you have your stage 1. So this is the initial certification registration audit. You have your stage 1 and stage 2. You do the on-site document review during stage 1. Stage 2 addresses the implementation of that documentation more or less. And then generally after that stage 2 audit, you have 30 to 45 days. Sorry, the 30 to 45 days is in between the stage 1 and stage 2. And then you generally have about 60 days or so after the stage 2 to close out any issues or any nonconformities. But the sooner that obviously you close out those nonconformities, the sooner you can get your certificate. So after your initial certification is done, you're certified to ISO 14001 now, then you continue your certification requirements. So every year, so you have your initial certification, and then the following year you'll have a surveillance audit. So generally these are done annually. If you choose, you can do them semi-annually every 6 months. And your surveillance audits are simply partial system audits. We're looking at areas of previous concern or issues that we've identified at the last audits, or there's key requirements that we're going to look at every time, like objectives and targets and management review, internal audits, those kind of things we're going to look at every surveillance audit. So for the following 2 years after your certification, so you're going to have those surveillance audits, and then that 3rd year you'll have a recertification audit. So your recertification audit is simply a full system audit. We're going to come in and look at basically your entire system, every requirement, making sure that your chapters 1 through 10 are being met. Obviously, every audit is a sampling, so we don't have time to look at every document, every piece of evidence, but we're going to get a good sampling of your entire management system to make sure that you are still in conformance to the requirements. And then again, once you close out any nonconformances, we'll issue a new certification for an additional 3 years, and then you just continue that cycle. So that kind of completes a general overview of the new 14001-2015 revision, and also the certification and transition process. So now I'd like to open it up to any questions that you may have on either the standard changes or the certification process, or if you have both. If you have organization-specific questions, please email me those later or call me later, and we can discuss those specific questions to your organization. But if you have general, questions on either the standard or the certification process, I'd be happy to answer those now. So I'll leave my information up here, so you have my email address, you have my phone number, that anybody can contact me at any time. So feel free, I have everybody on mute, but feel free to type your questions into the question box in the panel to the right. Or if you have any specific questions that you would like us to discuss in more detail on future webinars, please type those in as well. Like I said, we'll be each month leading up to the standard being released, we'll do specific chapter webinars to just go in more depth of the specific requirements for each chapter. So, I apologize. One question we had here. Let me open this up. A lot of companies may be certified to both 14001 and OSAS 18001. And the question is, is there a planned update for 18001 to again be compatible with 14001? Absolutely. So, and actually, OSAS 18001 is being converted, being revised into an ISO standard. So the new ISO standard will be in line with the 14001 structure. So absolutely, that's probably more realistically going to happen sometime in 2016, I believe. But don't quote me on that. I'd have to confirm, but I believe it's 2016. Next question. If you missed part of the presentation, or if you want a copy of the presentation, it will be available online on our website following the webinar. It'll probably posted within a day or so. So if it's not posted later today, come back tomorrow and take a look and see if it's up there. If you need it immediately or would like a PDF copy of it today and it's not posted yet, email me and I'll send you the PDF copy of it. Question here, R2 2013, which is the electronic waste recycling standard. So it has a series of questions for internal audits. Do you anticipate there will be the same thing for 14001 2015? At this point, I'm not sure if there is, if they plan to release a checklist or a series of questions for internal audits for 14001. I think it might be a good idea and something they should consider, especially with the standard being so new, even for companies for implementation purposes, to have a checklist of the requirements and what to look for to make sure that the requirements are being met. That's something I'll look into as well with ISO and see what they plan on. If they don't, that may be something PGR might look into is creating a checklist for organizations to use. Just basically outlining the requirements, not stating what they should be looking for, but just listing in a checklist manner what the requirement is, so you can look at your system to see if that requirement has been established and implemented. So the next question is, what training do auditors need to go through? It depends if you're looking for internal auditor training or lead auditor training. If you're already certified to 14001 as a lead auditor, generally, if you're working with a certification body, your certification body will provide you with the upgrade training to the new requirements of the standard. If you're looking for internal auditor training, I'm sure there's a number of companies out there that will begin to host, whether online or face-to-face courses for either initial ISO 14001 training or potentially upgrade training for those who have previously had internal auditor training to 14001 2004. Next question. Unfortunately, at this time, we do not issue any participation certificates for attending these webinars, as far as for purposes of obtaining a number of CEUs or credits. but that's something that we will hopefully be implementing here in the near future. All right. Well, I think that's all the questions that we have right now. If anybody has any questions, I'll hang on here for another minute or two and address any questions that anybody may have. If there are no further questions, if you come up with any questions later, again, you're more than welcome to contact me. I'll be happy to talk to you about your specific situation and what some of these changes might look like for your organization. Obviously, again, we can't consult as registrars and tell you how to do things, but we can definitely help clarify the requirements. All right, well, if that's it, again, we'll be having webinars each month that will start going into the details and the specific requirements of the standard. So if you're interested in that, please pay attention to our website and the emails that are sent out with our updates on our upcoming webinars. So look out for those. Other than that, thanks everyone for taking the time to join us today. I hope it was useful and helpful and was informative. It looks like there's one more question. When we go for lead auditor course on ISO 14001 2015, after how many days of its publication? If you're working with a certification body like PJR, as soon as we've already started the upgrade training program, once the final version comes out, there may only be slight modifications that we'll have to do to it, but almost immediately after the standard's released will we start doing the training. It's probably going to be 6 months, at least probably 6 months or so before the probably 3 to 6 months before that first organization does get certified. A lot of the companies who are currently certified, they probably won't get certified, immediately. Some might, but it might take a year or two to implement all the requirements and get their system up to the new version. So we don't anticipate probably too many to the new standard within those first 3-6 months, but the training will be held almost immediately.